First of all, I want to make a disclaimer. I'm feeling totally unqualified to be doing this panel in front of such intellectuals here, but it was just a fascinating afternoon. So let's give a loud round of applause to everybody. So I have a few questions that we can quickly discuss, and then maybe let's make it an interactive session. So if, as we are discussing some of these questions, anybody has any follow-up question, then we can sort of take that up also. Um, I think most of us, at least sitting in the audience, were thinking throughout the afternoon, wow, what do we do with this? Why is it we are in such a tragic situation in this country that 5, 10,000 years of civilizational legacy, our knowledge systems, where are they? I mean, why is it not there in every school, in every institution, in every household, in every facet of our lives here? So I guess the first question that I want to pose to anybody who wants to go first, can we have another mic so that there's another mic? Okay, that's fine. Um, sure. So my first question is, yeah. So if I may just articulate that a little bit more, my first question really is. At least from my limited understanding of the problem, this is a systems problem, right? And since all of us are engineers here, or most of us are engineers here, let's think about a systems engineering solution to this. And the system we're talking about here is the ecosystem, the surroundings, our the various stakeholders that we have. So how do you start? And the problem statement is, how can we socialize the Indian knowledge systems in this country, and then create a process and start a journey of actually executing?
In fact, yours is a complicated question. I was answering a much simpler question, but it's startling. The mathematics that we teach to our children in the entire school is all generated in India 1500, between 1000 to 1500 years ago. Only its identity, nature, methodology is transformed completely, and so nobody knows that we generated all that. And much of the language teaching also is systematized based on the various grammars that we had evolved. But again, that link is not given. So I think one of the things is quite a few things that are taught were originated here, but they are not taught in relation to the way they were thought of and with the methodology in which they were thought of. But the larger question about the ecosystem is a different issue. I would like others to.
Raghu, you want to go next?
He's saying, see, there's a paper I read, I think there's even a book that looks at all the Samskrita aksharas, looks at many other languages and analyzes them by saying which of these have got lost in those languages. Right? And, things like this. But the fact that, for example, Samskrita is such a basic language in so many ways. Okay, not just in what Mishraji was saying. See, like the akshara, when you give an ucharana, no, correctly, what it does. So there are a lot of yoga mantras, when we do mantra, it does something to the whole system. Yeah. So like that, there are several little things which are critical, which have all been given a bad name. Yeah, every little thing. Right? Like my grandmother used to do kolam. Okay, if you call it an infinity diagram, it is somehow a great thing. But what it does to the brain in being able to do those complex things is incredible. So there are so many things culturally embedded and all of that. And also, why is it done with rice flour? Yeah, so that ants can come and eat it. Right. So all of that has been called superstition or given a bad name. right? So the first thing is to give it its due. And secondly, today I think if you add science to the Sanskrit, people will ag- agree that it's making sense. Why are people coming to yoga? Because somebody puts an electrode and says it's useful. If you do it, you don't need an electrode, yeah? You have an experience. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I guess my question is taking it from the understanding that is there in this room that there is such a wealth of knowledge out there. My question is, how should we socialize it? How should we bring it into the mainstream? And the naysayers out there, the critiques out there, and obviously we have a fundamental problem that a lot of this is at best a little bit of data related, right? I mean, we were having the discussion in the morning around, I mean, Diti, with you only when we were meeting that do you have data? So maybe some data is there, but unless we can do a data-driven research on some of these aspects of our knowledge systems, no, everybody will rightly so doubt it. So the question is, if you were to move on to research, how do we actually implement some of this? What kind of projects or programs can we create? How do we execute against those? How do we raise funding for those? Maybe Professor Sampath, if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, coming back to the first question and second question is also related. Like we have to have some doable things that we introduce the Indian knowledge system and then bring it to the mainstream education. And it has to start from the primary level up to the higher level. At each level, we have something to do and what to do. The first thing I feel that we should give exposure to our children at primary level to their own languages along with Sanskrit. We must expose them to the nature. We must expose them to music, dance, art forms, kalari poetry. There are so many Indian ways of doing it. So right from the beginning, children should get that exposure.
How do you do that when you have this board curriculums already defined?
Yeah, see, this is what yeah, okay. I'll tell you one example, the experiment which I have done, the pilot, and it's a huge success. The board comes to play its role in class 9 onwards. Every school is free to design its own program up to class 8.
Okay.
No one interferes in that. Taking advantage of that, in 2003, I adopted a school in Lucknow, Set MR Jaipuriya School, where I convinced the parents, the teachers, the students, the management, the principals, and the other teachers in the school by constantly orienting them towards the Sanskrit language. We made Sanskrit compulsory from playgroup to class 8. And it is through that when you visit, any one of you can visit to say MR Jaipuriya School, Gomti Nagar, Lucknow, see that those students are very different. They excel in every field. You go, they speak fluently Sanskrit. Their articulation, their confidence, their memory, their concentration, their language, their understanding of the Indian knowledge system is very different than the other school. And it was possible. Now we have it in 60 different schools, the same curriculum, same way of teaching we have spread. In next 2-3 years, we'll be spreading to another 50 schools. So like this, my idea is to have as many schools adopting this curriculum, and then through that they get in touch with what is Indian knowledge system, and the curriculum is designed accordingly.
Excellent, excellent. If you can pass on the mic, Professor Iyengar, on the research part of it, how do we get a research process and a system going around the Indian knowledge systems? Because he ultimately, rightly so, my sons laugh at me when I say, look, why don't you have homeopathy? They say, show me one clinical study. Maybe clinical studies exist for homeopathy, I don't know, but I did my searches, I could not find anything. Ayurveda, we have probably very, very limited studies out there. So, how do you create a scientific process where it can be proven through statistically significant data that some of these theories are actually correct?
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting and important question which has bothered me for several decades, and that is how I am into this area personally. Somewhere it has to start, somebody has to do these kinds of things. And I heard Dr. Raghu, perhaps correctly, but why science should not be there in Sanskrit? Sanskrit, as it is, if you think the cultural things or the textual things, they are logical and science. The science that was done in this country might have been in a different way from the Western things. But what is bothering is, after somebody does something in the West, people telling, yeah, we also have this in our thing. That is wrong because there's ignorance or glorification, and that is wrong. That should not be there. It is an intellectual tradition. Emotion is there. And the difference when I said the two things, the science that is done in this country perhaps is in a different way, is to some extent what was expressed by Dr. Mishra. That is, the people who did this, they did not consider themselves perhaps as simple body. So that concept of Dehatma Buddhi or the Deha itself is me was very less among those things. Maybe the very advanced scientists also do like that. It's only an intellectual, where they are not so much bothered about their personalities. I don't know whether I put it up correctly because there is a division in the way the world perception, the European perception, what you may call nowadays, some people call it the Abrahamic perception, whereas the Amic perception here is different. So the two, the way the knowledge grows is going to be different. And the other question which was brought up to a large extent by what she was telling, it is a balance between intellectual and emotional life. That balance is there, that is what has been tried in this country for millennia. And now if it has to come back, a very important question is, what are the methodologies we do? Can we go back to the ancient methodologies? We don't have such kinds of gurukulas where the student-teacher relationship was so intact. They passed on pockets of knowledge without talking or without writing or something, but it was transmitted in a different way. We don't have that. Maybe in Vedanta schools or some yogis may be able to do in a different way, but not in this kind of knowledge, not in this kind of thing. And even if it is there, I don't think it is going to spread all over India within 10 years, 15 years, or a project period, or even in a century. Because the data shows in the last 5,000 years it has not happened. Not that all the people in this country are yogis, or they are not Brahmavadins or Brahmavadinis. So we are in the same more or less boat all over the world. And we can say that that is how maybe God has willed, if you want to use the word God, or maybe nature is. And we are part and parcel of it. So the universal thing has to continue. We have to adopt the intellectual tradition, suit it ourselves, and it has to start from the grassroots level, as people are telling. That's from the primary level, is I agree. But I don't think pumping Sanskrit is going to do this, even though I love Sanskrit. Because there are already 50 other languages in this country. In what way those people have not contributed to IKS? Maybe they did in a different way. If they had grown millet and showed that that is going to be useful, there is in Kannada, there is a song, Ragi Mahatva. That is Ragi is the great, it's called Ramadanya. Ragi is called Ramadanya, not just rice, eat Ramadanya. It is Purandara, I don't remember who has done that song. So why not? And this has diffused from the Sanskritic knowledge, I agree. I mean, there is no doubt on that. So that has to be preserved, that has to be cultivated. And the data has to be generated. There's one question I will say, because Rudra Pratap was raising this question about quantification and all. The sounds that you were mentioning of the timber and other things is different and all that. And also in the morning, I think something was mentioned about uchara. That comes up in Panini as, sthana and then, prayatna. That prayatna is obviously subjective. You open your mouth this way, and all of that. So there are some constants, there are some variabilities. That variability can be captured only through sampling. So we have to generate the data. If you have not done it so far, let's do it in future.
That's my very basic question. How do you start
Yes,
the data?
one of the things.
So, I'm sorry, we're just running behind time. Raghu, you wanted to say about these two questions? Because I had a question for Deepthi. Can I just ask my question to you? Yeah. So, there are two questions I wanted to pose to you. The first is going back to this data point that you're talking about, and you did mention earlier that some data is definitely available, which is also, enables machine learning algorithms to be built and AIs to be implemented. But what's your overall sense as to, do we need more data sets? We need large data sets. We need probably large language models to be able to prove some of all this wonderful stuff that all of you talked about. And the second question is, what role can Plaksha play in this entire initiative? And we are really trying to learn from all of you to see what we can do here.
Well, I think overall the world needs more Sampada and the Mishra cheese. That's the short answer to that question.
Sure.
I think, just to sort of jokes apart, we need as many interpreters of knowledge, as much as we need with people who work within certain verticals and expand the scope and scale of things. So we need to perhaps generate several generations of people who are able to interpret that knowledge initially, at least, and find ways to actually interpret whatever was documented, and also data, statistically significant data with p-values and r-values, and like I think Srinivasa was talking about, there are many other ways to do nyaya, pratyaksha, pramana. We have all of these methods. These are fairly viable methodologies to actually directly and very quickly implement in educational pedagogies. And so let's say we want to create a project-based curriculum which uses pramanas of various sorts in solving an AI problem. So I think pedagogy is one place where, multidisciplinary pedagogies is one place in which Plaksha can begin.
Right.
And institutionally, you could offer electives which are completely looking at interpretation of modern problems through index means and methodologies. That could be a beginning. And neuroprosthetics, mathematical modeling for using index knowledge systems is a very nascent area. So these may be first few baby steps.
Sure.
Is what I'm thinking.
I hope you will come and teach. All of you, right? Sorry, 1 minute. Sumita, you had a point?
Yes. So as you all can see, we've had a lot of interest from the faculty all day. But what we would have liked to see is more interest from students, right? And as all of you can understand, for students, who have been raised in very different contexts, unless they're getting something from home, a large majority of them are thinking, what are all these people talking about? Yes. Right? So they haven't come running to listen, even though for us it's very, very fascinating. So this is our biggest challenge. I feel that, in social sciences, we say the emic and the etic view, the insider view and the outsider view. So we have one work of maintaining the traditions and developing the knowledge and the interpretation, and that is very important work, and all of you are doing it. But in education, we also have to look at how to take this knowledge and present it in a presentable, easier way to students that it makes sense for them and it's attractive to them. So like what Dr. Mishra did today, and he showed us that language, how it's an inquiry-based language, how we can, Deepthi showed us stuff about the music and she's offered to do this like them, Raghu has offered to talk to students. We are all making efforts. But as you can see, it's a challenge. How do we reach? What are your experiences with reaching out to students who are not raised in this tradition, not familiar, and who kind of not so attracted to it, if I may say. Because as educators, we are interested in how do we get them to engage with these very powerful ideas. So, what did your thoughts?
Yeah, so just 30 seconds. I guess the point here is maybe we should start with some bite-sized, maybe some projects, some small projects, maybe some small courses, and we could verticalize those courses depending on whether it's music or it's language or it's astronomy or math or whatever it is. So there can be a thought process around creating some kind of a pathway around the formal coursework.
It's very necessary to show usefulness of that in today's world. If you do not show the impact on the ground today, this minute, it will not work. The best of ideas can be khayali pulao for a millennial today.
There was a question from that.
Sorry.
Just one minute.
See, there are two things. One is you have to show priority come. You have to show its use, how useful it is, right? And I don't think that's too difficult. In my area, it's not too difficult because people are talking about yoga. You have to help them to see that this is going to really give them results. And there's enough that's been studied, it can be put together. But I think there is a problem, which is slightly different. See, I had some knowledge of how NIT started. They took 2 years when they had a group of, I think, 25 or 30 young people who were brought into the system and who were taught what is design, what is Indian design, and so on for 2 full years before they had a single student to teach. Now, most of the universities that are talking about Indic knowledge systems are already in business. And then you will bring in issues like saying, how to return on investment and all this kind of thing. Now, if you really want to bring in Indic knowledge systems, get 20 people, put them through a whole system, help them to decolonize. Teach them several of these things for a couple of years, and then ask them to look at their subjects from an Indic point of view. Yeah. So I've looked at OD from an Indic point of view. Right? I couldn't have just, somebody just coming and giving me a class on Indic OD, it couldn't have happened. So I have to reorient my mind first, and then when I look at this, there are so many things that will unfold. Now, you guys are in a problem because you have not done that. Can you pull 20 people out and say next 2-3 years, we will go through a rigorous process of really reorienting ourselves and then looking at our subjects. Nothing wrong with economics or any such thing. Yeah? If you shift your mind, right, you'll have an Indic approach to it. Politics, there can be an Indic approach to it. Policy formulation, every one of them is the mind. So you first have to work with that. You cannot work with the content and tweak it here and there and nothing will happen. Yeah, I'm sorry. No, it won't happen.
We know that. Yeah.
Thank you. What I just wanted to say was a very, very, for me, I think for all of us, it's an insightful, rich series and session of presentations. And what sort of came through to me, most of the talks that you gave, is that there's a not necessarily the content. The content is interesting in terms of maths or science, and one can kind of teach that in a descriptive manner. But it's really the kind of, I don't know what word to use. Method isn't even the right word. So what sort of came out in various talks that you gave was a different understanding, actually an understanding of an inquiry into the subject. That is this, which is fundamental, which universities don't deal with, and which seems to me lie at the crisis that we're facing today. And so many of the talks, for example, the idea of being able to formulate a passive sentence in something, it's so profound. that something is working through me. I'm not the doer, but we're so obsessed with this idea now. It's become, global. It's neither Western or Eastern or anything like that. Everyone thinks in those terms. So what are the avenues in which the kind of way to approach who you are as as a person or as a human being? What constitutes that? And like you said, someone said, focusing on the other always, or in terms of measuring statistics. Most of what you said is actually an alternative to that. Alternative understanding of human being. So you would have to rethink your other curriculum also at Plaksha, because it is so focused. It's already coming from a particular worldview which is not questioned. One of measurability, one that measurability is everything. And if it's not measurable, then it doesn't exist. So that is so ingrained in the way you're teaching things here, in the kind of message that is going across. You would have to review all of that. You can't have a little bit of curriculum here talking about Indic traditions. No point. And for me, what you said today is a contribution to what's happening globally. And it's not about, like you said very nicely, Dr. Professor Iyengar, not about glorification and so on. It's about what is the contribution. If you have a language that is so profound, to think of happiness in terms of space, the contraction of space, and the Spanish thing, I don't want to go on. But I just think, how does one,
So we have a few more minutes left, I think.
Now, there is a question on what should be our focus on research. Abstractly, in several disciplines, we retain the techniques or technology or technical details of our classical or Indian knowledge systems in their practice, music, philosophy, religion, language. But we are largely disconnected from the large tradition in which they have evolved, in the sense that the textual tradition, the teacher tradition, because we have stopped teaching them, we have stopped looking at those books, we have stopped understanding those books. When we see some profound point somewhere, we get excited, but that excitement in itself will not bring us the broad understanding by systematic study of all the basis from which it has sprung. Perhaps we have lost quite a bit of the corpus of text, but the available corpus of text are very huge, and available number of people who can understand it are very huge. But we have made no systematic effort to reclaim from the technology that now in several areas, even the books may not be there, like physical artifacts, like Delhi Iron Pillar, or like the temples, or so many things, the dams. The books are not there. I mean, the whole world does research on it. I mean, in the last 200 years, on Indian iron and steel, there may be 200 papers, of which 100 papers have seen in the 21st century. But there used to be only 1 or 2 labs in India where a little research was done. So there is no limit for doing serious research on it, but we may not be geared up for it. We may not have created the apparatus for it, we may not have created the background for it. But if we understand the problem, we may start doing it in one area, another area. Now, to set up something in a university or an institution for research, it's crucially dependent on the people who come and do it. However much we may wish that we want to do some research in India, unless we see somebody who is capable of doing something or wants to do something, to that you put a group or to grow on. The larger issue why we are not getting students is not because that students are not interested. There are 2 factors. One is maybe these are not the best students who would be interested, but that's also not true. The other is how have we related these things to them at the level in which they would get interested. So utility is not the only way in which students get interested. They get attracted by something interesting, something nice, something they can relate to. So unless some interesting courses are taught, it need not be very tailor-made to one discipline.
This is much older tradition, right? Much older tradition. Before all this quantification and data and the emphasis on that came up, right? So it has its own sort of evolution, that how did knowledge progress. In last 300-400 years, 1500, about from 1500 onwards, when science started becoming this this particular discipline where it started asking for very hard proofs, right? And then that science, because of various reasons, journals came, societies got formed, blah blah blah, peer system of evaluation, etc. Several things put together, it became such a strong force that the entire narrative of knowledge generation shifted completely to one side. That this is the only valid way of generating knowledge. And that's where the whole game we have lost. Okay? So now the question is that in this scenario, today, why does your son say that show me one clinical study? Or any, for that matter, any young person will say the same thing. Because that's what they have been bombarded with. That's the only viewpoint that has existed. So much so that every other discipline today is dying. Every other discipline. Look at literature. How many Premchands do you hear of today? Right? Look at any other discipline other than science and engineering today is drowning. And it's because, neither they have the generative power for money or livelihoods or whatever. It's very, very sad situation. We are thinking, at Plaksha, we are thinking of arresting that. It's a huge challenge we are taking up, by the way. Huge challenge. But we are up to it. We are here not for the short run. We are here for establishing the modern Takshila. That's what our goal is. So we are up to this challenge. Now the question to the panelists here is that are you in a position, we don't want to stop here. We are fascinated. I have never sit through a workshop in my own discipline of research. The entire afternoon, lecture after lecture, ever, in any conference, which I did, and I paid attention like a child. Because it's so interesting, so fascinating, so fascinating. So we don't want to stop here. We want to see, we want to do this over and over. Okay? So we want your commitment. Today we did it for 1 day. Let's do it for 3 days. Let's start getting our students more excited about this. Get them to attend these lectures. Do it little leisurely so that, if this scholarship is available here for 7 days, let's say, and it doesn't have to be that 7 days we are doing workshop, right? We're just discussing, there will be students, faculty members, all that kind of stuff. Create that buzz. And then see whether we can resurrect and alternate to what exists today as the only way of creating knowledge. That's what universities are meant to do. All the universities are drowning. They are doing the same bloody thing that every other university is doing. And, I'm sorry. That's it. So that's what I wanted to say, that we can take a concrete step. I don't want to stop here. I'm so enthused by the discussion today that we want to take it forward. And let's design a program so that we can, start infusing more and more of this and think more deeply.
Do you permit me for?
Sure.
It's not the last word. I'm not carrying.
No, please.
One thing which comes up is about Sanskrit and the other things versus other. You can put it either way. There is no opposition to either this language or that language. But the Indian knowledge system, there is no question that it has developed, as we see it, the intellectual tradition in Sanskritic thinking. Whether it is because of Pawnini or pre-Pawnini, let us not worry about it. It is from the Rigvedic period, it is a particular Sanskrit language thinking. This has been analyzed by MacRobert or some Jacobi's student in Germany, because they all picked up Sanskrit in the 19th century to see how the mathematical thinking developed in India. They have written long philosophy of science in Sanskrit, kind of articles. But that Sanskritic thinker, whether it's passive voice or whether I have to say snihyami or prinami, it's okay, it is a different matter, I may convey it. But for mathematics and science, it's a special thing. So some new knowledge can come. But that is a long-term project.
Right.
You have to have a group of people who can think in Sanskrit, work in Sanskrit on modern language, on modern subjects, including robotics or mechanical engineering or on quantum mechanics or on chemistry or mathematics. That is going to be a long-term project.
Absolutely.
No, that you have it. The present-day Sanskrit universities, they can think in Sanskrit, but not about science. They are only thinking of the past. That's all what I am doing.
Yeah.
Hence, we may have to have parallel programs. One a long term, one a short term. In the short term, what do we do? The easy thing is to have for student projects, as you were telling. They can do experiments, they can do analysis. For them, some of them may do learn Sanskrit and do it. We have to pick up some smaller problems. One problem that I am having, that I can say, is this Ucharana, which comes up so many ways, in so many ways, particularly Sanskrit Ucharana is like this, about mantra and so many things. That can easily be quantified. You have to have a lab where you are going to record it and you do a analysis, a spectrum analysis, and this has been done for other languages, in European languages. It comes in speech and hearing. So they have done, if you see the Journal of Acoustical Society of America, there are hundreds of papers on that.
Right.
Why not for Sanskrit? I haven't seen even a single one on this.
Even
They
text
give
to
figures.
speech.
Sorry?
Even text to speech.
Yeah, they will simply put the figures as some vrta, and this one you do the thing like this and all that. That is all fine 2000 years back, not anymore. And if this is done, and even music here, and this data has to be collected, and it is only an ensemble analysis. It is the population variation which I have to get. It is not, definitely it varies from person to person. What prevents this country, great country, when Mahalanobis could establish a statistical institute, can't I do the variation in other sociological parameters? Definitely possible. We have to think about it and do it, that's all.
I think something
Just
one more point.
just maybe final two comments. I know again fascinating discussion, but why don't you go ahead?
I'll just be loud if it's okay. Just a 30-second bio. I went to IISc and much like sir sitting here, I took subjects on nonlinear dynamics, stochastic modeling, and that really inspired me to connect it with my childhood, where I grew up learning Sikh history and Mahabharata, and I knew this is what it is, right? But I had to really struggle for more than 10 years after to go seeking teachers, to go seeking places where this knowledge is available and accessible to someone like me, right? And the place where I am today, right? Like I've learned from some teachers sitting here, Raghu specifically, and I know that, and I do this work with young people in Punjab. When the first year they come in, they all are super resistant, right? They go through yoga workshops, they go through very intense, deep inner work that I've learned from Raghu, and all of them are resistant, right? It takes them a year of unlearning and deconditioning, and by the second year, I'm the most in demand, right? Even though I really go and challenge them, but they want me. They want me to come and be available to them, make it accessible to them. Right? I think what I have learned is what was missing in my education, even at a premier institute like ISC, was a focus and a center on my own self, right? An understanding of the mind, which is the seat of learning, was missing in a place which is dedicated to creating a learning environment, right? A focus on a very inside-out focus, where I begin from my own, even if it's prayojana, how do I use it, even though starting from there, and then the understanding of the mind-body connection. Right? It's not just the mind which is learning, right? Like we were talking in Dipti's present. It's the whole body which responds, the whole system which responds to it. That whole knowledge is missing somehow in institutions where we learning happens these days. And finally, the personal, social, and the systemic application of everything. It's not just I learn something and I use it to make more money. It's dharmic in many more ways, right? And I believe younger generation these days is much more aware. They have it in their vocabulary. They are much more self-aware. They care much more about the world than probably my generation did. If only we provide them an interdisciplinary environment where self is center of learning, personal, social, and systemic aspects are discussed deliberately, and there is this mind-body integration. There's a focus on mind-body integration. I believe that's an environment which will be very helpful. And it comes from my own experience of working with young people in Punjab from last 5 years.
Sure, well said.
30
seconds, 30 seconds, we really have to wrap it up.
One approach could be what Harvard did was to create champions of change. 5 scholars, activists, and educators who actually brought in certain new verticals into its schools. So, for example, they can be residents for 4 weeks. They supervise cutting edge projects. For example, if I were to come here, then I would say there's an AI vertical already here, then I would say let's develop a Raga based composer, AI based Raga stylistic composer which uses Raga knowledge to create a software that can be used in film scoring. Film scoring is so AI driven right now. So things like that. So people who are there, they're resident, they teach, they also, they have come up with a set of projects that they are willing to like mentor in the...
So when are you spending 4 weeks here?
It is possible to develop software.
Yeah, it is.
And with inputs you can change it.
You can change it.
It's possible.
And
Great idea.
So residencies.
We do have some kind of a loose tie-up with Harvard, so we can obviously
Some areas.
call upon them.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I'm always an application-oriented person, and when it comes to Sanskrit, my work is more in the non-Sanskrit field than Sanskrit. So in the areas of I found out, just take the data, how many children are suffering from speech-related disorders and disabilities. Children in India. How many children suffering from autism. So I took these 2 areas and I developed a model based on the Sanskrit Varnamala, where I have helped hundreds of children to become free from speech-related disorders and disabilities by following my own model. They don't have to pay anything. It just gets inorganic disorders.
Efficacy is close to 100%.
Absolutely, 100%. So, speech pathologists and plastic surgeons who deal with cleft palate patients. So, one question which came to me that when they do the surgery of the cleft palate patient, so they have to have a pre-surgical and post-surgical evaluation of the speech pattern of the patient. And all the speech pathologists, that's why a plastic surgeon has to depend on a speech pathologist. And 100% speech pathologists in India dealing with the Indian language speaking children for their surgery. IPA model. IPA is the International Phonetic Alphabet, which you find in the dictionary, Wikipedia, the pronunciation keys. And that is so unscientific. It just explains you the pronunciation symbols, diacritic marks. But it is compared to the Sanskrit Varnamala, it is very unscientific. So I convinced one plastic surgeon, Kalpesh Gajewala in Mumbai. So he agreed to follow my pattern of not following the IPA model, but following the Sanskrit Varnamala. And he has carried out so many surgeries, cleft palate patient, 100% result following the Sanskrit Varnamala pattern.
Has he published this?
Yes, he has published. You will find 2 papers published. One is, if you search speech language pathology and Sanskrit, you will find Kalpesh Gajewala from the medical science point of view, and from the Sanskrit point of view, my article. So we collaborated, as he said. We need collaboration. I know that part, he didn't know that part. What he knows, I don't know. But most of the speech pathologists, when I try to approach them, they are not in favor of adopting the Sanskrit Varnamala. So following the IPA,
We have some students waiting now for their
Yeah, so I think we can call this to a close. Thank you so much, everybody.